New York's highest court, the Court of Appeals, has now voted overwhelmingly to strike down a law that New York City tried to implement that would have allowed 800,000 non-citizens to vote. Essentially, this law would have stripped American citizens of one of the most fundamental rights, and that is the right to self-determination. Now, this is an article from the Daily Caller. It's a conservative news outlet. And this is titled, "Liberal Judges Join Conservatives to Plunge Knife into Heart of Blue City's Non-Citizen Voting Law." This is by Caitlin Richardson. She writes, liberal judges on New York's highest court sided with conservatives Thursday to reject the law that would have given non-citizens the right to vote. The law, passed by the New York City Council in December of 2021, would have enabled nearly 800,000, quote, lawful permanent residents, end quote, to vote in local elections. The New York Court of Appeals ruled 6-1 to strike it down. Chief Judge Rowan Wilson wrote in the ruling that it is plain from the language and restrictions contained in Article 2 that citizen is not meant as a floor, but as a condition of voter eligibility. The franchise extends only to citizens whose right to vote is established by proper proofs and who vote by ballot. New York City Mayor Eric Adams did not veto the bill, allowing it to become law back in January of 2022. Republicans and a group of voters sued shortly thereafter, arguing the state constitution prohibits non-citizens from voting. The state's constitution stipulates in Article 2 that every citizen shall be entitled to vote at every election for all officers elected by the people. Supporters of the law argued that this does not necessarily prohibit non-citizens from voting. However, Justin Wilson wrote that under that particular interpretation, municipalities are free to enact legislation that would enable anyone to vote, including, as counsel for appellants stated during oral argument, 13-year-old children. Now, my friends, this is a big deal in the state of New York. The Court of Appeals, with their 6-1 ruling, have effectively ended this battle to enable non-citizens to take votes away from American citizens in the state of New York, at least for now. Of course, New York could try and appeal further, but if they can't win in a state with 6 Democrat-appointed judges for the Court of Appeals to just 1 Republican, how can they expect to take it to, say, the Supreme Court and expect a different outcome? Now, there was one judge out of the 7 who thought, this is a really good idea. And that was Judge Jenny Rivera, who provided the lone dissent in a 32-page opinion. She argued that the majority's interpretation diminished the power of local governments statewide. She asserted that the state constitution grants localities the right to define their electorate for municipal elections. And she said that this autonomy is a cornerstone of effective local self-government and that the law was a legitimate exercise of New York City's authority to ensure accountability from elected officials to the communities, which is stupid. But that's what she thinks. Who cares about citizens being disenfranchised? What do they matter? My friends, the reality is non-citizens, and I'm just going to go out and say this, they should never, ever, 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 ever have the right to vote in American elections. Even if it's for school dog catcher, the answer is no. You're not a citizen. You do not get to vote in our elections. That affects our lives. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. And while this is good news for the state of New York, it's not all sunshine and roses, though. For while this was a big win for the American citizens in the state of New York, the dark cloud of illegals and non-citizens voting within the state remains firmly in place. You see, despite this victory, New York happens to be one of those pesky uber left-wing states that do not believe in ensuring that actual citizens are voting in their elections. And they do this by saying, who needs ID to vote? All you need to do in the state of New York to vote is just say, hey, this is a name, this is an address, and yippee-ki-yay, you've proven who you are and can vote. But don't worry, they say. Election officials verify against a registration list, which is nice. And in fact, they even take it a step further. First-time voters who registered by mail may have to show some kind of identification, like a utility bill or even a bank statement. But for most, no ID is required beyond signing an affidavit saying that, yep, golly gosh gee, I sure am a citizen. And if that wasn't enough, not only do you not need to prove who you are, you don't need an ID when you go in to vote, you also don't have to provide a driver's license or passport when you register to vote in most cases. All you have to do to become a voter in the state of New York is complete a voter registration form, which can be submitted online by mail or in person. The form requires that you give your full name, where you live, your date of birth, and an affirmation meaning, yep, you are a U.S. citizen at least 18 years old by election day. Now, you are asked to provide a New York State driver's license or a non-driver ID, or the last four of your social security number. However, if you don't have either of them, well, you don't need them. You can still register to vote by submitting a form without an ID number. But it gets even better. Let's say that you want to get an ID or a driver's license. Do you have to prove you're a citizen then? If you guessed no, you are correct. You do not have to prove that you are a citizen to get an ID or driver's license in the state of New York, meaning all of these checks and balances are non-existent. New York's voter registration process relies almost exclusively on self-reported information. When registering, people must affirm under penalty of perjury that they are U.S. citizens. But there's no mandatory upfront proof. You don't need a birth certificate or a passport when you register. The state does say that they cross-check voter rolls against Department of Motor Vehicles records and other databases to flag potential non-citizens, but that only happens after registration, not as a preventative measure. So essentially, you're dealing with an honor system approach, which is beyond stupid considering that you have tens of millions of people who are breaking the law every day by being in this country illegally, meaning they are criminals who by law, by definition, don't follow the law, don't follow the rules. And we know that there are at least 475,000 people in New York City alone who are illegal aliens. So while the Court of Appeals does eliminate legal non-citizen voting in municipal elections, the absence of a voter ID means all of that is basically nothing. It's meaningless. And sure, if someone at the voting booth, for whatever reason, challenges you the idea that you are a citizen, well, all you have to do is sign an affidavit saying, nope, I am a citizen. And then you can cast your provisional ballot. And get this, these provisional ballots are usually counted anyway, unless specific evidence of ineligibility emerges later. Evidence, mind you, that is hard to gather because without routine ID checks, there's no way to really know. But of course, they tell you, don't worry about this. This never happened. The argument is, from these people in New York, is that there's no widespread fraud happening. It's so rare. But of course, it's just gaslighting. It's just the trust me bro garbage from these institutions, which we have learned time and time again are less than trustworthy. So, again, while it is nice for the courts to shoot down the blatant theft of voter power from New York citizens legally, the 800-pound gorilla in the room remains.